This is Pop Culture Yearbook. On this show, we pick pieces of pop culture that were important to us in a given year. We then discuss memories and dig into those movies, albums, shows, and more. I'm Brad.
I'm Pete.
I'm Giff.
And we are going to start 2001 tonight. We gave you a little preview last week. Hopefully you listened to it.
Crack
And
the
tonight
yearbook,
we're going to
Pete.
kick it off.
Oh, let's open the yearbook.
Let's open it up right away. Let's not waste time.
No.
So we have a lot of big memories from this year. We're going to break them up into two parts. We all got married, as we said in the preview. We're going to talk about our weddings in the third episode, but tonight we're just going to give a quick overview of where we were at and what our lives were like at that time outside of the whole marriage part. Gifford, why don't you go ahead? And...
Well,
this is an extramarital episode.
As you stated, Brad, this was the year of the wedding. During this time, obviously, this time of your life, you go to a lot of weddings, but this year was especially impactful because, of course, all three of us got married. I was in a bunch of weddings and got to attend a bunch of weddings. I wrote down 6 that I could remember, 4 of which I was in. So it was a pretty good time. Of course, along with weddings comes bachelor parties, and we had a couple bachelor parties that we got to attend as well. So those were a lot of fun. But post-wedding, of course, Courtney and I bought our first house. It was a townhome in Burnsville. So that was kind of a big deal. We moved into that in beginning of June. And that would have been a couple weeks after we got married. And then a couple weeks after we moved in, we went on our honeymoon to Cancun. So that was a lot of fun. I also started a new job that year. Right before I got married, I interviewed for a job at the Eagan Home Depot. I was currently at the Northeast Minneapolis one as an associate. I interviewed and got a job as a department head at the Eagan store. So I started that job the Monday after I got married. So get married, start a new job, move into a new house, go on a honeymoon all within a month. So that was kind of nuts. This year, once we moved in, we also adopted a dog. Macy came to us.
God, that dog was from that long ago?
Oh, yeah. We got her right around Thanksgiving.
I thought that was a little later.
Of 01. Courtney really wanted a dog because I was working retail hours, so I was gone a lot at night.
Macy's a great name for a Thanksgiving dog.
Right? Exactly.
Oh, and you were gone at night and you got a dog to protect, and this was like a dog that weighed like 20 pounds. No, yeah, 10 pounds.
She was about 13 pounds of pure fury. But yeah, Courtney wanted, something around the house when I wasn't there.
Hold on. Was it a big floating dog? Like that had to be held with ropes?
Right. Yeah, we just kept it out in front of the townhome. The neighbors loved it. So we got Courtney's parents brought Macy from the Bemidji Humane Society. Kate brought her down for a weekend to see if we liked her, and of course we did. So we had Macy for, oh, good Lord, we must have had her for 10 years, I suppose. And then, of course, I also had my oldest nephew, Cody, was born in December of 01. So kind of a nice way to finish off the year there. So those are a few of the memories I had from 2001. Pete, what do you got?
The memories I have from 2001 were that it was our first full year of owning a house. The year before, we had actually bought the house, but it was later in the year. No, actually, it was May, but it was like our first full year. But in 2001, it was, as we all said, it was the year that we got married. And main thing I remember is our next door neighbor. He was an older VFW guy, and he was just a super nice guy. He was maybe, in his 50s when we moved in, and he passed away probably about 8 years after that or so, just guessing. But just how much of like a mentor he was as a homeowner, like all of the different things that you just don't ever think about when you're buying your first house. So it was like, he always had the tools on hand. I could just walk in and basically borrow whatever I needed, just go right into his garage and take what I needed. He would show me how to do stuff like putting baseboard up. paneling, all of that kind of stuff. And so he was always taking the time, and just like, if it was nice out, he would just be standing outside all the time, smoking a cigarette. And, if you just wanted to socialize with him for half an hour, he'd always give you a beer, that kind of thing. So his name was Andy. So rest in peace, Andy. He was just a great, great neighbor for, a young couple like us. Now the people that owned the house. Yeah. Yeah. That's what the show is all about, bringing back the memories of people that, had an influence.
Giving credit to those old guys that live next door. That's what this show is out. We should change the name of it.
Yep, old guy next
Credit
door.
the old guy next door podcast.
There was a night, and I think it was this year. It might have been a different year, but who cares? It was the previous owners, they were big time potheads that we bought it from. It was actually these kids, like 20-year-old kids or whatever, but it was their grandparents that owned the house, and that's who we bought it from. But we found everything out from Andy, that the reason they had to get rid of the house is because it got busted, and they got busted with like 20 pounds of pot, is what he said. And the grandparents, like, they knew at closing, they knew that we were going to hear the stories. And so they kind of tried to soften it up a little bit by saying all they found was a joint. So they said a joint. Andy said it was 20 pounds. And then the grandparents go, they just had, just a normal hobby like anybody would have. I go, what was their hobby? Oh, the glass blowing.
Nice.
Glass blowing. Okay. In a garage. Okay. I wonder what we're making there. Okay.
Grandparents never
but
saw
then
any of the tools to make the things that they had, but they had all this wonderful glass work around the house.
Right. And we did have at least one night, I think it might have been a couple, but where the cops would stop by our house when we weren't home, thinking that we were still the previous owners, because they had several run-ins with the law. The cops would show up, and Andy would be like, no, you're not. That's not the people you're looking for. And so he would kind of fend them off, and they'd be like, oh, okay, sorry for the mistake. And
well, it was nice. It was nice. The cops never found out about the heroin situation you had going on back then. They were smoking pot.
Yeah, exactly. I better cut that one out of the episode. I don't know if I want any unnecessary trouble. No, I'm
kidding.
Brad, you.
All right. Well, I'm just going to sound a lot like Gifford here, but so we all got new houses. So in the previous November, before we got married, it was kind of controversial, but we'd already started living together in an apartment, and it was my dad that even was like, well, you might as well. What difference does it make?
Right.
So we bought a townhouse in November.
That was the reason you were living together.
Well, that's true. You left, and so I needed a roommate for a little while, and so yeah, it was like, well, why wouldn't you? But we got engaged like right after she moved into that apartment, so then it was more like mostly official. Started looking for houses. We bought one in November of 2000. So we had a townhouse that we lived in this whole year. We were married in April, so we were married for most of the year, but not quite all. But so we've been living together and engaged. This was my second and third year of teaching, and I was teaching all 8th grade, and I had a very busy schedule with tons of classes and kids, but it was the same class all the time. So it was like there was parts of the year where I taught the same thing 6 times in a day, which it's easier to plan for, but it's like, holy cow, that's a lot of times of reading the same thing. And so I'm getting used to a real job and a career because I'm, a couple years in now. During the summer, this is one thing I remember. So I needed a job in the summer because I wasn't old enough yet to just do what I do now, which is golf all the time. But I graded standardized tests for other states. So like kids that would take their state test and had to write short answers. Those tests got to go get scored by somebody. And so there was a corporation that did that here. And I found that, and it was a great job because it actually paid really well and was easy. You just sat there and the hours were good. And so, it was a really cool job. But one of the memories I have of that summer that I liked is that, so during that summer, my wife was working at AT&T, just like in the call center. But so she where that was, so I worked from 8:30 to 4. She worked from 8 to 4:30, and her job was right on the way to mine. So we actually carpooled for that summer, and it was really fun to be able to do that.
Oh.
We didn't have kids yet. It
Oh.
was really cute. And we both remember that. It was great. So we drive, I'd drop her off, I'd go to work, I'd get done a half hour early, I'd come back, pick her up. When we could go home, we could go get a drink, you could do whatever. So there was just a lot of freedom at that time. Very busy. You're trying to make a lot of money to build your life up, but you're becoming full-fledged adults without kids yet. So we still spent a lot of time with our friends, specifically you, Gifford, who lived nearby. Pete
Very
had moved
close.
away. We saw Pete a lot, but he moved farther away. And then Kim's friend, I remember back then we hung out with, and you did too, even like Tara and Sean. We hung out with them all the time. And so it was just, you look back and think about some of these friends that you're still friends with, but you hardly ever see because you're just way too busy. Back in this time, you actually hung out a lot with them, and it was just kind of a whole different period of your life. And so that's where we were, and it was fun, and it was a little scary because, you know, you're trying to make a name for yourself, but worked out pretty well. Anything
those
else?
Are some wonderful memories there.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah.
All right. Well, so speaking of work and jobs, we are going to tonight talk about Dave's choice, which is The Office, the UK version, which came out in this year. And so he asked us to watch the first 2 episodes of that series and discuss. And it's a very short series, so I actually was able to finish it last night. Gifford, you've watched most of it, and Pete, you watched the first 2 episodes. So we're all in a different spot, but you know, you can get through it pretty fast. So I actually watched them all, but we're going to discuss the first 2 episodes. This is why Dave picked it. So we asked him to just share kind of where he was coming from. Had either of you watched this before?
I started watching it a few years back, and it just really didn't hit me quite right. So I think I watched maybe the first 2 episodes and just kind of went to something else.
Pete, have you ever seen any of it?
No, I had not.
I did. I don't remember. It might have been almost 10 years ago. I did watch the whole series, but like, I think it did, like you said, it didn't really hit me. And I wasn't like paying attention. Like I'd sit there and have an episode on, but I was doing something else. So like watching it this time was like totally new because I remembered hardly any of it. And so I have a lot of different.
Did you remember the
opinions.
big plot twist ending?
I did remember like all the characters and stuff, but like it just like the story and everything, it just did not hit me the way the American one did, which, you know, we've all watched that.
Right.
Anyway, Dave said that he chose this show because when we started doing these podcasts, this is one of the things he really wanted to cover because he's a huge fan of this and the American version. He kind of combines them together. But so when he mapped it out by year, he picked this was going to be his choice for 2001 because that's the year it came out. He didn't actually start watching it until 2003 or 4, but this is still when it came out, so that's why he's got it here. But he had finished the series well before the American Office ever came out, so he knew this one before that.
Okay.
And then he was working on the movie team at his place of work, big company, and he got the seasons through work, and he was a huge fan of the show. And so I think, and he said in a lot of his other notes, he just kind of related to much of the workplace vibe in it and the bosses and everything. And so he was really excited when the American version came out, but he loved this one and actually saw it first and had a strong reaction to it. And so here we are talking about it tonight. All right. So episode 1, let's just start there then, right?
Yeah, might as well.
Yeah.
So, you know, it starts out and you've got, you know, we all know Steve Carell, but so David Brent is the boss and it is Ricky Gervais, who is really fantastic actor. And I didn't realize until I watched this, like, he's really multi-talented. Like he's can sing. He's like
plays a guitar, sings. Yeah.
I didn't know that. And
he's got a really good stand-up. He's a great stand-up comedian too.
Well, yeah, I know. I don't know about the funny stuff, but like he can sing, and he's just he's a little bit more of a entertainer than I
sort of like Seth MacFarlane, who's in the same kind of vibe.
True. I could see
who I love as well.
But anyway, they're both very awkward. My first reaction was that he's probably even more awkward than Michael Scott and seems even a little
Yes.
more pathetic
100%.
than Michael Scott. That was my first
Yes.
reaction. What'd you guys think of David Brent?
I would tend to agree with that. I think one of the main differences between David and Michael is that underneath all the bravado and shtick and I gotta act like I'm the boss, Michael always had that underlying heart,
Yes.
and you could tell he really cared for his people. And I mean, I've been watching, I think I'm on episode 5 of season 2, and there's not any of that coming from David Brent. It just seems like he's out for himself. He's always
Right.
got to act like he's the best at everything, and you don't get that same heart that you did from the Michael Scott.
I'm glad I watched the whole series because a lot of my opinions really formed and changed by seeing it all compared to if I just had seen these first two. But what do you think of David Brent so far, Pete?
I think you're right. I personally, in The Office, I like Michael Scott better because like you said, this was just the point of the show is all these awkward moments and everything, but there was just times where it just felt like a little bit too awkward, more so than funny. It's like
wait
teetering.
until you watch more if you do.
Yeah.
Does it get worse?
Way? I'll talk. We'll finish these two, and maybe I'll give my overall thoughts. But it gets to the point where I almost could not watch the show anymore. Like it's crazy.
And that's the way I got with the U.S. Office. Like I would sit there with my hand over my face, like just peeking through my fingers because I was embarrassed. This version is even more so. I mean, and it's more risque. There's a lot more.
Yeah, we're gonna get to that too.
I'm glad you brought up the point about worse. I'm glad you brought up the point. Well, actually, Dave brought up the point how similar it was to his workplace. I was actually at the same workplace as Dave, and it's pretty spot on. There are people in that particular environment, and it wasn't like a terrible environment, but there are certain individuals that just had this kind of toxic masculinity almost, where they were just pretty arrogant and cocky and everything, and just had that kind of attitude about them. Now I've worked at other places since then, and that have not had that same kind of environment, and it's very, very different where I'm at. But I thought that was a really interesting point that Dave made there.
We also are introduced right away to Tim and Dawn, who would be the Jim and Pam if you've watched American Only. And one of the first gags in episode 1 that I thought was great is the old stapler in the Jell-O. Which happens in the American version, and it came right away there. So that was a funny one that I liked.
Well, and that first episode has so many of this. I mean, it's the same plot line, a lot of the same jokes. Like, if you get something from corporate, it goes in the special file. Which is the waste paper basket. They have that joke in the American one as well. The gag where he fires Dawn. Michael Scott does the exact same thing where he fires her as a joke. I mean, it's pretty much, that first episode is almost the exact same episode, just with different actors.
Another one of the gags that I liked with them was later in the episode, Tim makes the big wall between desks. And then he makes Gareth leave him a message when he's trying to talk to him, and he won't even answer the phone, and
then leaves.
But Gareth, by the way, then is the Dwight character, and one of the first things I wrote down about him that I liked is he's very much like Dwight, in ways much worse even. But Tim talks about slitting his throat. Like I don't remember why he's upset about something. Obviously, how bad the place is. But Gareth corrects him about, no, if you're going to do it, you got to do it this way. And it's like,
you got to get behind the trachea or something and come out. Yeah, it's just, again, and Mr. Know-It-All. And much like Dwight, like he was in the Territorial Army. I guess I'm not sure what that is.
Yeah, I don't really know what that is, but the jokes about that are pretty good, how they make fun of him.
And Dwight was, on a volunteer sheriff or something on the American version. So there's all those similarities. And of course, he's the assistant to the regional
Yeah,
manager.
that's in here too. That same.
You know,
it took me a minute. It didn't take long, but it took me a minute to figure out which one is supposed to be Jim and which one is supposed to be Dwight. The reason, well, I mean, when you're first watching it, but the reason for it is because the Jim character was wearing what Dwight normally wears in the new Office, or in the American version of The Office, where it's the yellow shirt and then that kind of brown tie.
Oh, I don't remember that.
That's
but the
what-
hair
oh,
on
that's what
Garrett's
threw
right,
me.
like, the hair
Yeah.
kind of gives it away.
Yeah. But
Well,
then as the episode went on, I figured it out, obviously. But
well, and Tim is kind of the same way too. Is like with Jim, that he was always so fun, so nice. But Tim's just as much of a jerk too. I mean,
Well, Tim is also, I think, a lot more, especially as you get through the series further. He's a lot more sad and pathetic also than Jim is. Like Jim, he has his ups and downs, but you don't ever really think of him as a loser. This guy, there's times where it's like he's living at home with his parent and he just won't do anything. He won't take any risks, and it's like he's pretty sad where he's at in his life.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You also, then I wrote down for this one, in this first episode, you don't really get to know many of the other characters, though. Do you feel any other characters you really know their names at this point or connected to?
Well, there was a Kevin and a Keith.
Yeah, so Keith is the one that, but you just don't, they have
Kevin.
small bits.
You don't really connect with them.
Yeah, nothing much yet.
No, but there were, some other similarities there. My wife, when I was watching it, she walked in and she goes, I can't wait to see who the Toby character is.
Oh yeah, and there never was one, and that actually will kind of tie into one of the issues that Dave and me both had with this show here. So we'll save that for a minute.
Toby never shows up.
Oh no.
Okay.
No.
Okay, because that was always one of the great conflicts in the American Office was Michael's just complete and utter disdain for Toby.
This is more, I think. So the guy that runs the other office, Neil. He becomes a guy, so eventually he becomes the boss of David, and he becomes a bigger part of the show and is there a lot, and that's who David has his big, like, he hates him, and he does a lot of really awkward, bad things around him, so.
Right.
I guess he's not like Toby as far as his job or what he does, but that's like the same type of rivalry.
Correct.
So there was getting back to the comparison to our former workplace. There's a number of times where it just like played to the corporate buzzwords really well that you always hear from these types of guys. Like when David Brent is sitting there and just saying, it's not about, how I increased revenues by 17%, all those stats that he's rattling off. And then he finishes off by saying, it's all about the people. And it's like, come on, coming from a guy like that, there are some people that are genuine about it in the real world, but some people, they're just throwing total bullshit at you, and that's what I thought played it perfectly.
I was wondering when he said that if those were actually true facts. Like, did he really do that in his office, or was he just throwing out some random number? Because you don't ever get the sense that this guy is any good at his job at all, and
cares about his job. Yeah,
it's just like we'll get to that too. That'll be kind of a follow-up thing here. But
well, and that, just to add on to that, like with the American Office, there were times where you saw what Michael could honestly do. Yes. Like if he had to go out on a sales call, he could nail down a client like nobody in that. Like he had real salesmanship and skill and knew how to do the work of at least his salespeople. So, I mean, you just never really got much of that from David Brent. It just seemed like he was in his spot and he wasn't going to leave and, didn't really care about much else.
The other thing I loved about him that I noticed about David Brent in this first episode, and it continues all the way through. Did you notice the just nonstop, constant playing with his tie? It's genius. It's this nervous tick, but it's so good, and it just adds to his awkwardness and his weird character and the way he is around people. He never stops playing with his tie, and it's just a great visual way of showing what this guy is all about, which is not a lot.
Right.
I can't believe you didn't notice that.
I didn't.
It's one of those things. So one of the things Dave said he loved about him is he think he's a great physical comedian, and I don't know exactly which things he's referring to, but just a little thing like that, though, I think is a great bit of just physical to add to his character to make him even more to notice than just his awkward words that he uses.
Right.
Last thing on this first episode that I had is I just thought it's so low key, like it's so quiet and. And it's not like a sitcom. Like, a sitcom is usually much more in your face and, laugh tracks and all that. And so it was so different in that way. And I'm not saying it was bad necessarily, but it's just, you kind of got to get used to it. It just gives you that vibe. But that's one of the things that Dave had said he loved about it too, is he felt like that made it more real, like being from an office environment like that, that just seeing those people just sitting there quietly working, like he loved the way that captured the mundane, just everyday, nothing going on of that job too.
Right. And I think with that quietness, when you have those lines come out where they're just so awkward and just the worst thing you could say in a work environment, I think when it's quiet like that, it just lands so much harder, and there's not anything else going around in the office. There's not a lot of talking or anything like that. So those comments just hang in that air so much longer.
Yeah. It's not like if you're socializing at a bar or something, there's other people laughing, having a good time and everything. It's just like when you're in that setting, nobody wants to be there. They'd all rather be doing other things, and they're just going through the motions. And that's what I thought the American Office did really well too. It was that kind of same thing, but I think it was this one that kind of invented that sort of mockumentary.
That's really where it came from.
Style, right? Yeah.
Last comment I had on this episode is that I also thought the theme music was terrible. I think it's so bad. And it adds to that low keyness because it's just blah.
But it was similar. I thought it was interesting that it was a little bit more low key, but it was similar, like in the same vein as the theme song from the American version.
Really? I guess I never really, because that one seems to me a little bit more.
I thought it felt kind of the same. Yeah, it was, but it was still kind of it gave you that same kind of feel, I thought. But
yeah. All right. Anything else in episode 1?
Nope.
No.
All right. Episode 2. So in episode 2, David has it's his friend's daughter or something. Is she related? Is it a niece? I don't think they're related.
I thought it was his niece, wasn't it?
Or was it just or the niece of his friend or something like that?
I thought it was the niece of his friend.
Anyway, she's like staying with him. He's like watching her, but she's old enough.
Daughter of his best friend.
Her name is Donna, and she joins into the cast. At first, it sounds like she's just there to like watch for a day, but she ends up staying in. Like she becomes a character. Mm-hmm. She's an attractive girl. And this is where one of the issues that I had with the show kind of really started. And then I was interested to see when Dave gave me his notes, he said the same exact thing. And we don't know if it's just a cultural thing or what, but the amount of sex talk on this show is, well, it's funny, a lot of it, I mean, in a way, but it's like, to me, it's so unrealistic. I mean, is that okay in England? I mean, that's what I meant by there's no Toby. Because it's like HR doesn't exist. There's an episode where a girl has a birthday and they're giving her all these crazy presents and a dildo, and it's just like, and it
passed her out in the office.
It's like, is that the way it is in England, or is it just they're just doing that in a way that's over the line and to be funny? But it gets to be really something in season 2. Like, I mean, there's Chris Finch character who is similar to I can't think of the guy.
David Koechner's.
Yeah, David Koechner, that's his name. I don't remember what his name of the show was. But he is just, I mean, some of the things that he does and says are just, they're disgusting.
Yes.
And it's so over the line.
Three factors at play there, I think. There is, I do think it's a little bit of a cultural difference. I think it's also that it was 20 years ago. And I think that in a small office environment, it's different than a major corporation. Because
do you remember the things they were saying to this girl who had just showed up that day about, I mean, they were basically, it's like, it's crazy. So for me, it just, it's not that I can't believe that content is on TV. It's like TV's changed a lot. I just can't believe that could be a realistic thing in a workplace and I wrote, "Where's Toby?" So, and if you continue to watch, you're going to see it get even worse and worse and more. And it's just kind of like, I don't know. It takes away a little bit to me. It's like, cause there's a line where it's funny and where it's almost believable, but there's no line in this show and nobody ever apologizes. Nobody ever gets in trouble. It's just like, this is the way it is. So I don't know. It kind of started right there.
I think some of it might be cultural because this was obviously airing on English television. And I mean, you know, when it's Tim's birthday, he gets a blow up penis
right
at the office. I mean, I think sex stuff might, and again, this is just conjecture, but I think sex stuff isn't as big of a taboo over there, or it must not be, because obviously they were showing dildos and penises.
Well, and again,
and
I'll go back to
their television.
It's a TV show
the fact
too.
That it's not as taboo
when
they show those things is not what surprises. It's that they're doing it in the workplace environment where it's like everybody just accepts it. Like if you think about it in a real workplace, I can't believe that's actually the way it could be. It's crazy.
And I think part of it might be the shock value too. Like, holy crap, they're actually doing this crap at work. Yeah.
It's Ricky Gervais's sense of humor that's just coming through there too. I think that's his style.
You also had in this episode, Garth is wearing a gun holster with his cell phone in it, or not Garth, Gareth. Sorry,
Gareth. I was going to say it's Gareth, not.
And
Garth.
then one of David's actually like funny things that I think he did is when he takes the phone out and does a Clint Eastwood impression.
Mm-hmm.
And they all just look at him like he's stupid, but I actually thought he was pretty funny, and I thought that was like an actual witty move he made for once.
That was clever, yes.
That was the other thing. Besides singing, he does a ton of impressions too that are really good. That's the other thing that really stood out to me.
Yes.
The part of that episode that stood out to me was the stapler scene where they're holding it out the window, and he's threatening to drop it. And he's like, "What if it kills someone? Kill somebody? They'll think you're the murderer because it's got your name on it." Why would a murderer put the name on a murder weapon to stop people from borrowing it?
Yeah, that's funny.
I had to write that whole scene down because I thought that was hilarious.
Well, and then in this episode, Gareth gets to have a office for interrogation of people, and I loved the line. Him and Tim go back and forth, and Gareth says, "In here, I have special," and before he can answer, Tim goes, "Needs?" And there's a couple little back and forths like that were really funny too. But it's another example, like, you know, if you know The American with Dwight, Gareth is power hungry and takes those little things to the max when he gets that opportunity.
Right.
Yes. And what was he investigating?
I can't remember now. I just wrote down that he had an investigation room.
He was investigating who sent that picture out to everybody.
Oh yeah, there was the picture of David that got sent out.
And Finch was the one who ended up sending it out. So then he was okay with it. He wasn't happy when he thought one of his employees sent it out, but when his buddy Finch sends it out, then it's, you know, it's all a good laugh then, isn't it?
In it, this is it's a laugh. That's that lot over there. David in this episode already, second episode, I wrote down that he starts to get more and more infuriating with his lying and his ridiculous behavior. And this, I already wrote down, how did he ever even get this job? And so that's another kind of issue that I had. And then I found Dave actually had the same question. Like you mentioned, Steve Carell's character, you get to see where he does have competence and that there are things that he can do. In this show, this guy doesn't ever show why he got that job. And then actually in an episode or two later, they were going to promote him. And he fails the physical. That's the only reason that's how Neil got the job. But it's like, again, the line from, okay, Michael Scott's terrible. He's annoying. He does a lot of things wrong, but you can still see enough there to understand where it came from. This guy, it's like, it's almost too unreal to even believe he could be there and how he ever got the job in the first place, much less keep it with all this behavior going on.
Right, but did you see anybody else in that office that was competent?
Well, good point.
I mean, at some point, you just need somebody to fill
Well,
the
Neil
position.
seems to be competent, and he's running the other office, so you'd think,
right,
comparing the two, that one must be actually somewhat competent.
but I'm saying in his office before they combine the Swinton and is it Slog or something? Slough. Yeah, in the Slough branch, I mean, who's competent in that whole branch? I mean,
well, Gareth, I guess.
Everybody's there just effing around.
So David read a book about this show too, and he wrote down that they said in the book that, and part of the thing is the office for the British version was never going to be a long thing. So, you could, and well, spoiler alert, David Brent gets fired at the end, deservedly so. And so that's 20 years ago, but whatever. But you can see how in a shorter version, you can have a lot more of that happening. In the American version, one of the big things they had to change is with Michael Scott. They had to make sure that he was more innocent and that he wasn't as mean-spirited and selfish. Even though he had a lot of the same qualities, they thought through and thought ahead, and that he had to be a better person overall.
Well, yeah, for viewability. Otherwise, you're not going to keep people coming back if you have that horrible of a character.
Although in that first season, if you remember, it was not very well received by critics, or it wasn't a big hit either, and it was maybe not even going to come back, but it came back mostly because he was in the 40-Year-Old Virgin between season 1 and season 2.
Okay.
And once that took off, they then used that as a reason or a way that they thought this could succeed, and they made some changes, and so he became better starting, I think, in that second season from there, and that's where a lot of the changes started to come about.
Well, and even still, you see a lot of times, that first season, the characters are finding their voice, and you need to figure out what works and what doesn't.
That's what a lot of shows like that.
Well, and that reminds me, I mean, Parks and Rec is my favorite show of all time, one of my top 2 or 3 at least.
What show?
Park and Rec.
Here we go. Oh my God.
I can't believe I did that. Dang it. But that show, the first season also, I do not like. I mean, I would watch it if I'm going to binge it, but I do not like it very much. It's not very funny. They focused on too much of Amy Poehler in the wrong way in that first season. And then season 2
up the story.
And they made a lot of, you could tell the changes they had made. They changed the tone, they changed the focus, they brought in all these other characters, and it becomes this, classic
juggernaut. Yeah.
So it's very similar in how both those shows started and kind of took off.
Yeah.
What else? Anything else on episode 2 that you guys have, or overall? I kind of got Dave's final notice thing here. I'll read in a minute, but I'll give you a chance first.
No, I didn't have anything else.
Pete?
When Dave types in sex fetish, he finds a site where people are punished for having big breasts, and they're like, no, you shouldn't be punished. You should be rewarded. No. That made me laugh. I thought that was good.
That was in episode 2 also?
I think it was in episode 2.
I remember it now, but I didn't have it written down. It's funny.
And a lot of times when I watch, shows with actors with heavy accents, I can make my way through it without needing subtitles.
Oh, well, I'll get to that.
When I watched this, I turned the subtitles on because the jokes come so quick, that you need, you got to be able to understand what they're saying in order to get it, because they hit one joke and then they move right on to the next one. It's just line after line.
I think that's a huge change from my first viewing that I said about 10 years ago to this, is I didn't have subtitles then, and I really missed a ton, and that's kind of how I zoned out and kind of just didn't pay attention. We've gotten to the point where we watch subtitles. I have subtitles on all the time now, everything I ever watch. So it's just,
you are old as balls.
It's just the norm now. But you have to, with these kind of shows, I have to, because you cannot, and they shouldn't be talking. I mean, obviously they're going to talk in their normal accent, but like if you're British and they talk fast and things blur together much quicker. And if you don't have the subtitles, I'm not going to understand a lot of that. And so it makes a huge difference.
Yeah, you're going to miss out on so many of the jokes.
Yeah. Just to kind of finish this off here, I think Dave said he liked The Office because it introduced a style of show that was new. And if it was a failure that got trashed, like it almost did at the beginning, do the people involved get to make more shows? And so the creators of this show were also big in Parks and Rec, Brooklyn Nine-Nine, The Good Place. Modern Family is a show that took the same concept and put it into its own in a family thing. And so, again, one of the things that he likes about this show is that the butterfly effect. What if this hadn't taken off? What else might we not have had? Or even just that American version. If that got canceled after those first 6 episodes, would a lot of those other shows ever even come about? So it's very impactful in its place in history.
Yeah. Well, and it didn't have a laugh track, which all those shows you pointed out, it would show that you could get rid of a laugh track and not have to worry about, you could put more jokes in because you didn't have to wait for the laugh track to get done. So.
Yeah. So anyway, I hope you guys both finish. I'd like to hear your views when you're all done. But what I was saying earlier, so these first 2 episodes, I thought it kind of started slow. I wasn't that into it. But it gets better by the beginning of season 2. I was starting to laugh out loud a little more and getting into it. But right around where you were at, Gifford, a little before that, like the last half of season 2, I was just looking for a merciful end. Knowing that there's only 14 episodes, I kept saying merciful in my head. I need this to end. I'm going to finish it because it's short. But and it's not that I don't like it. It's I can't watch it anymore. It's just he's so bad. He's such a horrible person, and he should not have a job. And I just, it crossed the line to me from cringe to just whatever's beyond that. They're going for the cringe factor, which you have throughout. But I felt later in the show, it got beyond that to the point where I cannot handle this anymore. So I had a very roller coaster ride through. And then it did have a good ending. I liked the very end. It has kind of a nice wrap up. So that's good.
All right.
All right.
I got nothing more to add.
Okay, so we have 2 lists we're going to share quick. Dave asked us to do a list of our favorite workplace entertainment, meaning TV shows or movies that revolve around workplace settings. And so we each have a list of that to go. So I think I'll save his for last this time. Pete, why don't you go first?
So this is actually a little harder than I thought it was going to be, but it depends on
Depends on how when you see his list, you'll see some that you can really stretch some. So
when you're considering workplace, so I actually only have 4 here, but I started out with Clerks, one that we talked about on this show. That's a workplace movie, right?
I didn't think of that until I saw Dave's list, but it definitely fits.
Yes. Office Space is kind of the obvious one that I had to have on this list. I had Horrible Bosses.
See, and
I didn't think of that one.
Didn't have that one because there was so much of it outside of an office, but I did consider Horrible Bosses.
Sure.
Yeah, I can see that.
And then Anchorman was another one.
Awesome.
I didn't think of that either.
And again, it's like how far do you stretch your horizon on considering it a workplace? I mean, if you have a cop show, you could consider that as a workplace if it's about police department or something like that. So I don't know.
Speaking of that, can I go next?
You go right ahead.
So my honorable mentions, I had Night Court. Pete, you like Night Court?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Brooklyn Nine-Nine, so cop show. And then I had Clerks too.
Very good.
Clerks, not Clerks 2, Clerks as well. And then my top 5 I had. So here's one that I thought was kind of interesting to fit, but the show Newhart. The whole show takes place in the Stratford Inn, and I love that.
I never would have thought of that as a workplace, but
I didn't either.
It works.
I was trying to think of my favorite shows, and then I was trying to think of what shows were, and I thought that's definitely one. So, Number 4, you'll like this too, Pete. The Naked Gun. I mean, that's all basically in a workplace, cops. So I picked that as 4. Number 3, I had Cheers. Cheers is all in the workplace. And then my top ones are pretty obvious. So number 2 is Office Space. And then number 1, I put Parks and Rec and The Office together just because they both they're so similar as how they started out. I think Parks and Rec is better overall, and I think they both had their own thing by the end. But if I put them together, then I had one more spot open, so I combined them.
Sure.
GIF.
Very nice. Well, I made 2 lists. I made TV and then movies. So for TV, my number 5 was Cheers.
Nice.
Again, I put that one in there because half of the main characters work there.
Yeah.
The other half of the main characters, they're not working, but
they're still in that workplace all the time.
Yep. Number 4 for me was The Office. Number 3, Park and Rec. Number 2. Number 2 is Scrubs.
I'll put the laugh track. I'm gonna put the laugh track in there.
Oh, I didn't. Did you say Scrubs?
I said Scrubs for my number 2.
Oh yeah, great choice. That's a good one.
And my number 1 was The West Wing.
Oh yeah, you love that show too.
Oh,
So that's
yes.
never watched.
Never shut up about the West Wing.
So those are my TV. For my movies, number 5 for me was Empire Records. Number 4, Anchorman. Number 3, I think highly underrated, Waiting. Ryan Reynolds and Justin Long as waiters at a restaurant.
The reason why I watched it is because you told me about it. So
yeah, I've been trying to get my son to watch that because he works in a restaurant. Number 2, Clerks, and then number 1, Office Space.
All right. Well, here's Dave's list. He gave up the idea. So he had, and he even admitted some of these might be a stretch, but they all make sense in a little bit, I guess.
This whole podcast is a stretch.
And I almost put the Caddyshack in there.
Well, hang on.
Okay,
so his honorable mentions were Brooklyn Nine-Nine, like I had. He had Ted Lasso, which I guess is a good choice too. It's my new favorite show, and it is technically all pretty much in his workplace. Mm-hmm. Silicon Valley, which I also love. The one that I thought was the biggest stretch is he had Big on here. And while there's a lot that happens with him at work, it's just there's so much more. So I thought that was his biggest stretch. But it's a great movie, so great. He had Tommy Boy, Jerry Maguire, 9 to 5, The Mindy Project, and Night Court. Those were his honorable mentions.
Okay.
And then his top 5, he had Caddyshack, number 5. So there you go.
Oh, he did put Caddyshack in there. I was kind of thinking about it, but I did. Yeah.
Number 4, Clerks. 3, Park and Rec. 2, and he wrote down Park with S in parentheses. And Rec. 2, Office Space, and 1, The Office, British and American combined. So that was
okay.
All right, and we're going to wrap this up with our choices for music of the year, just because this didn't fit anywhere else, so we're going to throw it in here this month. So, I had 8 because I couldn't leave any off. They're all pretty equal. So I had 8 albums that I loved from that year. What about you guys?
Well, at this point, I'm not buying albums anymore. I'm getting more into talk radio. So
radio.
I just went into and looked up songs that I liked and listened to during that year. So maybe I should go first since my list is maybe not quite as distinguished as your guys'. So
I kind of did the same thing, Gifford. So, and don't think that mine is going to be some kind of expert or whatever. Go for it.
I'm not an expert either.
So
come on, you are.
Just a few songs on here as far as honorable mention. I had Ride With Me by Nelly, Wasn't Me by Shaggy, Let Me Blow Your Mind by Eve, featuring Gwen Stefani. But yes, but for my top 5 songs of the year, I went with If You're Gone by Matchbox 20, number 4, Kryptonite by 3 Doors Down, Lady Marmalade, Pink, Maya, Lil' Kim, and Christina.
Oh, yeah, from Moulin Rouge. We'll get to that later.
So good. Nice. Number 2, Fallen by Alicia Keys, and my number 1 was Beautiful Day, U2.
So Beautiful Day, didn't that come out in 2000?
I had it on my list too, so I think it was 01.
Well, the album came out in 2000, and I thought that was the lead
it's probably one where the song was released in 2000.
Let me double check.
No, I mean, if you both found, I thought it was the lead single, so I assumed it was from 2000, but You guys look your stuff up, so that's fine.
No, I'll double check it. Pete, you go ahead.
All right. My number one favorite song of that year was Island in the Sun by Weezer. I love that song. Then I had Last Night by The Strokes.
Nice.
Beautiful Day by U2. Yellow by Coldplay.
Oh, well, see, and that album came out in 2000 as well. That's funny, but great
I
song.
just Google. All I do is Google 2001 songs, and then it says, here's the list. Miss Jackson by Outkast. I also had... that was my 5, and then I've got Kryptonite, also by Three Doors Down. I also had Ride With Me by Nelly.
Nice.
And then just a couple I had listed. When It's Over by Sugar Ray. I like that version of I'm a Believer by Smash Mouth that was in the Shrek movie. I think that was pretty good.
Shrek.
Mm-hmm.
Standing Still by Jewel, and Get the Party Started by Pink.
Nice. Brad is correct. Beautiful Day was released October 9th of 2000, so I'll make my correction.
If these songs were still big, you must have found this show they were big.
Still could have been on the Billboard Hot 100
it's
right.
Thing.
Yep. But
if you're talking about a song and not an album, it's going to get trickier. So
right. So a little asterisks in my top 5.
All right, so I had 8 albums instead of 5 because every one of these I had whole and loved them all in different ways. The first one is Cake, Comfort Eagle, which had the classic short skirt, long jacket on it. Which you know that song, right? I mean, come on.
Yes. Yep.
Okay. Yes. Cake is great. Number 7, the local band Semisonic album, All About Chemistry, came out. Their last album, actually, until they just recently got back together.
That didn't come up on my list. It
should. Next one, Jack Johnson, Brushfire Fairy Tales, came out this year. Number 5, my favorite band, REM, had their album Reveal came out.
Really? You like REM?
Yeah, really.
I had no idea.
Actually, I usually pronounce it Rem, though, because I don't understand how to say the things that I like a lot, like Park and Rec. So, next there's a band called Travis, who's from Britain, and they had an album called The Invisible Band, and I became a huge fan of them during this year and bought a bunch of their albums. They're great. Number 3, Ben Folds, Rockin' the Suburbs, came out that year. Pete, you mentioned The Strokes. That's my number 2. Is This It? And then my number 1 was my original choice for this year until I changed it to Temptation Island. But Pete Yorn, Music for the Morning After. I decided not to pick it because I thought it was probably a little too obscure for this. But that is one of the greatest debut albums I've ever heard. I still listen to it all the time. The guy is awesome. I saw him in concert just 2 years ago. And if you haven't ever heard that album, everybody that I know that's heard it loves it. And it's awesome. So Music for the Morning After by Pete Yorn. Number 1 of 2001 and also great still today.
Awesome.
So that's our lists. That's our episode, right?
That's our whole episode.
I think it covers it.
All right. Awesome. Well, thank you everybody for listening. Please give us a like or a follow or whatever they do on MapQuest or whatever it is nowadays.
MapQuest.
On the internet.
MySpace.
On the Google, MySpace. And be sure to leave us a review and enjoy the, what's the name of the band again? Preacher Row.
Yeah.
Preacher Row.
And remember, the next episode will be out early. Be ready on Saturday.
Very special episode.
Special episode of Pop Culture Yearbook.
Dark day in history.
All right.
Thanks, everybody.
See you then.
Bye.
alone to fear. No one's here to comfort me. Sorry for what I have done. Sorry that your son is gone. 7 steps and it will be my last. And start to me on my path. I turn and I look to you. I'm scared but there's nothing I